I have a question for you. If you do surveillance, how do you respond to suspicious neighbors and other people when you're out on surveillance? And even if you don't do surveillance, let me know in the comments down below, how would you respond if you saw a suspicious person out there that might be doing surveillance? Let's first kind of go over some of the complications of setting up covert stationary surveillance. At face value, you might think, well, this is pretty easy. You pull up into the neighborhood, you find a place to park, preferably underneath a shady tree, and you park. And you lean back in your chair and you sit there, you've got dark tinted windows, nobody's going to see you. When your guy comes out, you pull up your camera and you take some video. Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's not quite that simple. There is a lot of things that a surveillance investigator really should be going through before they even get out to do the surveillance. Myself, I like always do a pre-surveillance recon where I will drive through the neighborhood if possible, and I'll look for all the possible places that I might be able to park at. When I'm doing that, I also want to look for any possible already suspicious neighbors. You know, those ones that have the absolute meticulous lawn. If they're out every day taking care of their lawn, they're probably out every day watching everything going on in the neighborhood too. So I'll go through and I'll give you some examples of what suspicious people might say, and I'll let you in on some of the secret stories about some of my surveillances in the past. One that I've heard more than once, unfortunately, is somebody coming up and knocking on my window and just saying, hey, I saw you park here earlier today. What are you up to? This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. And this is a little unnerving. Usually when I go out on a surveillance, I'm going out way early. 6 o'clock in the morning at the earliest. A lot of times I'll be out at 5:30 or even 5 o'clock in the morning. Doing that helps make sure that most people are not going to see you. But there may be that other early bird that's up. For instance, in my neighborhood, my wife or I might be up at 5 o'clock in the morning when you pull in the neighborhood, and we might be sitting there having a cup of coffee, and we see your car go by, and we look out the window and we see you parked down the street. And I've had some that have happened that way. And then somebody comes up and they knock and they say, well, I saw you park here earlier this morning, like 4 hours ago, and you're just sitting in your car. What's up? Another one that people might often say is, oh, I saw a camera in your window. I thought I saw somebody holding a camera in your window. What are you doing here? And this is one that you have to be aware of too. And we're going to go through how to respond to each of these here in just a second. But that's one that often will happen too, is they will be doing their lawn care or washing their car, or they're talking to a neighbor over there, and then you saw your subject come out, or you saw a car coming down that might have been your subject, and you suddenly pulled up your camera and they saw the flash of that, and then when they got to looking, they see the lens of the camera, the front of your video camera, and they want to know what's going on. What are you going to say when that happens? Probably the most common comment I get when they're knocking on my window is, hi, do you need any help? What are you going to say when they ask you that? This is a very passive-aggressive kind of a thing that happens a lot. People just say, well, I'll just go see if they need help, and, you know, just in case there is an emergency or something. Something that's a little less than passive-aggressive is, why are you parked in front of my house? And what are you doing? You know what? I'm calling the police if you don't leave. I have had this happen to me before on numerous occasions. And I'll tell you right off the bat, the correct answer is not, you know what, sir, this is a public road and I have a right to be parked here and sit here in my car. Probably one of the most uncomfortable questions I've ever been asked by a suspicious neighbor is, are you a private investigator? I had one, and I've done a video on it. You can find it in my channel too. It was a rural one. It was one of my first cases I ever did where a man came over. I was actually doing surveillance on his wife. It was an insurance injury claim, and he come rolling up to me and just said, are you watching my wife? Now, how do you respond to that? I simply said, well, no, sir, I'm not. And he said, well, I figured you were a private investigator watching her since she's on workers' comp. So on that particular one, I came up with a quick story, and I just said, well, you know what, I am an investigator, but I'm an insurance investigator, and we have a client who lives down the road a ways, and he, about 6 months ago, took out a $10 million life insurance policy on himself. And then just a couple of months ago, he took out another large policy on his wife. And we're just trying to see what's going on and see what his lifestyle is and things like that. Now, I don't know how well that worked. He just looked at me and said, yeah, okay, and he drove off. I ended up finishing the case. It ended up being successful, but it did end up scaring me on a lot of levels, especially because it was one of my very first cases I ever did. And because of that, I decided that I needed to come up with a list of possible pretexts for when people do approach me and ask me what I'm doing. The most common one I do, and my most successful, I'm going to give you my best tip right up front, is the process server role. I always have some papers, usually a cover sheet and things like that. I have on the passenger side sitting over here to the side of me in the car. And I will just tap those papers and I'll say, sir, I am a process server. I have some documents here. I'm waiting for somebody down the street. And that often will make them just forget about you. Now another one that I do, and this one usually takes a little bit of a setup, you don't have to, but it's traffic survey. And I have some big orange magnetic signs that I had bought online. I got them on Vistaprint, and they just say traffic survey. And I can stick one of those on the side of my car. I can stick a clipboard up in my dash. I can put an orange vest on, and I'm playing the part. Even an orange safety hat, I can wear something like that as well. And I even have an orange light that I sometimes will put on top of my car. Now, if you have all of these things set up on your car, you need to probably be planning on being there for a little while too. If you have to go on mobile surveillance, if you're going at high speeds, those magnetic signs are probably going to fall off after about 50, 55 miles an hour, as well as that light on top of your car. So you want to be thinking about that too. But sometimes just having that clipboard there on your dash with a pen handy, and if you see somebody coming up, you can grab that clipboard and then you can just say, well, I'm just here doing a traffic survey. Being a photographer is one that I've used too. Now, you can't necessarily be sitting in your normal, everyday residential neighborhood in any city and just say, I'm here as a photographer. I've used this. I had one where I was out in the country doing a rural surveillance, and the only place that I could set up was about 1.5 miles away, cross country, to where my subject's house was. So I was able to set up a camera on a tripod, a super zoom camera, and I could zoom in all the way there and I could watch. And then when I saw a car leaving the driveway, well then I could grab my gear and I can go down to the highway and I can wait for them and I can do surveillance that way, do my mobile surveillance and follow them into town. Now, while I was out there for many days doing this, I did have some of the neighbors come by that were in the immediate area and say, hi, what are you doing? Well, I had that camera there and I just said, well, I'm a photographer. I've seen some wildlife out here. I've seen some coyotes and some deer, and I'm just, waiting for the moment and getting the photographs. Do you know kind of the time frame of when these animals are active and things like that? And now I was kind of along a creek bed and stuff like that too, so that really helped with this particular guise or this particular pretext on this case. This is one I haven't used, but I have heard of some investigators using it, probably a younger investigator, but I'm conducting some research for a school project. Again, have that clipboard and a pencil handy, or a tablet or a laptop or something like that, and play the part. I am a journalist researching XYZ, you name the topic. Now you need to know these ahead of time. What is that topic? Is it high-speed traffic along this route or something like that? You need to know what you're talking about. And then you need to be prepared with something like that for them to ask you other questions. Well, who are you working for? And for them to engage you and give you all the information you need for your research. Here's one that I've used with a great deal of success. And I use this because I know several people that work in the insurance business, and they are insurance adjusters. And if they are out looking at insurance adjustment jobs, they're taking pictures of roofs or whatever, they will go out and they will look at 3, 4, 6, a dozen houses, whatever. Then they'll stop and they'll find some shady spot to be able to park and do all of their paperwork. Now, a lot of times their preference is going to be at a park or something like that, but sometimes it's just in a neighborhood. So I'll use that with my clipboard in hand, and I've got everything there, and I'll have a bunch of papers with me and stuff, and I can just tell people, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. I'm an insurance adjuster, and I'm just finishing some paperwork before I head back to the office. Now, here's some big things that you need to keep in mind when using a pretext while you're out there. First of all, be respectful. Be professional. Don't blow your cover with an attitude. Don't be the guy that's out there saying, I'm doing this and I have a right to be in my vehicle on this public street. I've seen people do that, and they even have a perfectly good guise. I'm an insurance adjuster and I have a right to be here on a public street doing my paperwork. Nobody told them they didn't have a right to be there, so they don't want to have that attitude. And if you want the suspicious person to call the police, and worse sometimes, get on their computer or get on their phone and notify everybody in the neighborhood through the neighborhood watch program or whatever they have, then don't have these attitudes with them. You also want to play the role. You want to have your notebook, you want to have a pen, you want to have signs, you want to have a hard hat, whatever, and you want to practice the role. Practice makes perfect. You know how people often say if you want to be a big singer, you sing in the bathroom, you sing in front of the mirror, or speeches, if you want to be a good speaker, you practice that stuff in front of the mirror. Do the same thing for your pretext. Practice it when you're driving out to the case, when you're leaving a case, anytime. You can be in your car, and heck, everybody's out there talking to themselves while they're in the car today, so you can just be practicing that pretext role while you're going out on the case. Just assume that you're probably going to need a pretext and be prepared for it. Most of the time you're not going to. But if you assume you're going to need it and you're prepared for it, well, then you're prepared for it. Another thing is don't use different pretexts with different people on the same surveillance. So if you're confronted by one neighbor, don't tell them you're an insurance adjuster, and then another neighbor 2 days later confronts you, don't tell them that you're a process server. And when the suspicious person approaches you, make sure you are taking note of their actions towards you. How are they acting? Are they curious? Are they angry? Things like that. That goes a long way to help you diffuse the situation and hopefully change the outcome of it. You need to make sure the pretext is something that makes sense if you were out there for multiple days. That's why process server makes a lot of sense. If I'm out there today, and the guy that I'm parked in front of his house comes and confronts me, and I say, well, I'm just a process server. I've got some papers here and I'm waiting for somebody down the street. Well, if I'm back tomorrow, well, I'm still that process server. Make the pretext also make sense for your vehicle. I live in a very rural area, and if I go out in the country, there's a lot of white pickups because there's a lot of oil and gas and energy stuff going on, and most of those companies have fleet pickups, white pickups. But if I'm sitting out there in a Toyota Prius hybrid and I tell somebody that I'm just checking, safety valves or something like that on these oil pumps, well, that pretext probably isn't going to fly too well. Now, would you like more tips on being a private investigator? Well, if so, then check out this video.